I don't know how much of what happened to me can be explained. I'm not a writer. I don't have a flair for language or metaphors. But I know what I saw, what I heard, what followed me, and what's still out there, waiting in the rain. This started 2 years ago in a small town just north of Bellingham, Washington. I'd moved into a house that I didn't realize was already full. Not with people, not even with ghosts. Something older than that. Something wet. Let me go back to the beginning, before I knew what the rain really meant. The first thing that drew me to the house was the windows. They were original wood frame, arched at the top, and stained with that kind of antique waviness that distorts the view just enough to feel cinematic. The whole house was like that, charming, creaky, a little damp, but the kind of damp that smelled like moss and wood, not mildew. The landlord said it hadn't been rented in almost 8 years. Something about inheritance paperwork not being finalized. I didn't ask too many questions. I just needed a quiet place to write and escape from Seattle. I should have asked. It rained the night I moved in. Not the kind of storm you brace for, just a long, slow drizzle. Gray skies, thick air, a constant hiss of water against the roof. I noticed it right away, the sound of crying. It wasn't loud, more like a muffled, breathy sobbing, like someone with their face against a pillow. I paused while unpacking my books and listened. It was coming from the living room window. I walked over, expecting to find a draft or maybe a wind tunnel effect between the panes. Instead, I saw condensation inside the glass on the inside, but only in small ovals about the size of handprints. Tears. That's the only way I can describe it. The glass was weeping. Tiny rivulets slid down from nowhere, leaving trails that curved and smeared, then vanished. The wood around the frame was bone dry. I reached out, wiped a finger across the streak. It came back wet, cool but not cold, and it smelled faintly metallic like old coins or blood. I stood there for a long time, watching the windows sob. The house groaned around me, but the crying didn't stop. When I went to bed, the sound followed me, not through the vents or floorboards. It moved with me like it was attached to my head. It rained every day that week. Not a downpour, just persistent mist, the kind that settles over everything and turns the world quiet. I started keeping a notebook of the things that were off. It made me feel less insane. Here's what I wrote. The windows only cry when it rains. The tears are warm by morning. The water doesn't leave any moisture damage. It disappears. I hear whispering under the windowsills at night, but only after midnight. The living room window has started fogging from the inside, even when it's warm. On the 7th, I saw a shape in the mist outside. Not a person exactly, just a smudge, like a child pressing their face to the glass. Only it was on the other side of the street. I blinked, and it was gone. But when I looked down, there were wet footprints on my porch. Barefoot. Small. One thing I've never said aloud until now. I found a mirror behind the living room wallpaper. I was trying to patch a soft spot in the wall when my finger poked through the drywall. Behind it was something solid and curved. I peeled back a section, and there it was, an old mirror embedded directly into the wall, like it had been part of the house before the wall even existed. It was tarnished black around the edges and rippled like a pool of oil. I should have left it alone. That night, it rained harder than usual. Wind drove the rain sideways, and the windows began pounding, not from outside, but from within. Fist-like thuds against the glass. No pattern, just frantic, as if something wanted out. The mirror fogged on its own. I didn't even touch it. Then it breathed. I swear to God, The mirror exhaled. A low moan filled the room, not through my ears, but through the bones in my chest. My nose bled instantly. Thick black blood. The next morning, the mirror was clear again, but I saw something etched into the glass that wasn't there before. One word: open. The house started making noises like it was alive. Late at night, after the rain had soaked everything to the marrow, I heard it, a long, rattling cough from inside the walls. Not mechanical, not pipes, wet, sick. It sounded like an old man choking on phlegm. I pressed my ear to the floorboards. Silence. But when I did, I swear I felt something beat like a heart, slow and massive, deep in the foundation. I called the landlord the next day. He didn't answer. The voicemail said, "If you're hearing things in the walls, you've stayed too long. Get out before the second storm." The message deleted itself before I could replay it. I didn't realize what he meant until it hit. A freak thunderstorm rolled in at dusk, dark clouds like bruises covering the sky, rain that fell like sheets of cold breath. The windows screamed. I'm not exaggerating. They howled, sobbed, shrieked, not from wind, from within. The same wet hands smeared the panes, but this time there were faces. Dozens, blurred and pressed hard against the glass. I backed away. Every window was crying people. Their mouths moved like they were chanting, but I couldn't hear the words. Just the rhythm, like a heartbeat soaked in grief. Then the power went out, and I saw the figure in the hallway mirror, tall, thin, soaked. Its face was a blur of melted water and skin. It turned and vanished. But behind it, for just a second, I saw a room made entirely of windows, each one crying blood. The rain hadn't stopped for days. It was as if the sky had forgotten how to be anything but gray, and the world outside my windows was perpetually blurred by the steady downpour. Inside the house, the atmosphere grew heavier with each passing hour. The walls seemed to absorb the moisture, exhaling a damp, musty scent that clung to everything. I tried to distract myself with work, but the constant patter of rain and the occasional creak of the old floorboards kept pulling my attention back to the unsettling ambience. One evening, as I sat reading in the living room, I noticed something peculiar. The window panes were fogged up, not unusual given the weather, but there were distinct streaks running down the glass, as if someone or something had dragged their fingers down the surface from the inside. I approached cautiously, wiping the condensation away to get a clearer look, but there was nothing outside but the relentless rain. That night, I was awakened by a soft, rhythmic tapping. It sounded like it was coming from the hallway. I got up, heart pounding, and opened my bedroom door. The hallway was dark, but at the far end, I could make out a faint glow emanating from the living room. I crept forward, each step creaking beneath me. As I reached the living room, I saw that the old mirror I had discovered behind the wallpaper was illuminated, casting a pale light that pulsed gently, almost like a heartbeat. Drawn to it, I stepped closer. The surface of the mirror rippled slightly, and for a brief moment, I saw a reflection that wasn't my own. A figure stood behind me, tall, gaunt, with hollow eyes and a mouth that seemed to stretch impossibly wide. I spun around, but the room was empty. When I turned back to the mirror, it was just my own terrified face staring back. Over the next few days, the occurrences escalated. I would find objects move from their places, doors that I had closed would be open, and the whispering voices became more frequent, always just on the edge of hearing. I began to feel watched, even when I was alone. The house seemed to be alive, aware of my presence, and reacting to it. Desperate for answers, I visited the local library to research the history of the house. I discovered that it had been built in the early 1900s and had a long history of occupants who had either disappeared or died under mysterious circumstances. One article mentioned a family who had lived there in the 1950s. The father had gone mad and murdered his wife and children before taking his own life. Neighbors reported hearing strange noises and seeing figures in the windows long after the house was vacant. Armed with this knowledge, I returned home, determined to confront whatever was haunting me. That night, I set up a camera in the living room, aimed at the mirror. I stayed up, watching the feed on my laptop, hoping to capture evidence. Around 3 a.m., the mirror began to glow again. The camera feed flickered, and for a moment, the screen went black. When it returned, the figure was there again, standing behind me in the reflection. I turned around, but once again, the room was empty. However, this time, the air was freezing, and I could see my breath. The whispering grew louder, more insistent, and the walls seemed to close in around me. I fled the house, spending the rest of the night in my car. The next morning, I returned to find the house silent and still. But the mirror was gone. In its place was a message scrawled on the wall in what looked like condensation. You belong to us now. I didn't sleep for the next 2 nights. I couldn't. Even when I tried to close my eyes, the image of that pale figure behind me in the mirror, the one with the impossibly wide mouth, would burn behind my eyelids like an afterimage seared into my brain. I started to doubt myself. Maybe the sleep deprivation was causing hallucinations. Maybe my mind was conjuring fears out of stress and shadows. But the message that had appeared on the wall the next morning wasn't a hallucination. I had photographed it. I had shown it to a friend. And then something even stranger happened. When I tried to show the photo a second time, it was gone from my phone. Erased, as if it had never been taken. The only thing left in its place was a single audio file titled simply, Listen. I hadn't recorded it. I hadn't downloaded it. But it was there. When I pressed play, there was silence at first, just a faint hum of background static. Then, very slowly, the sound of breathing emerged. Shallow, wet, and slow, like lungs filled with fluid struggling to take in air. Then came the whisper, unmistakably close, as if spoken directly into my ear. You are looking through the wrong side. I dropped the phone. The audio kept playing even with the screen off, and the breathing got louder, more desperate, more alive. I shut the phone off completely and left it on the kitchen counter. I couldn't bring myself to touch it again for 2 days. The mirror's disappearance was only the beginning. The house began showing signs of something deeper festering within it. The windows began to fog up, even when the rain had paused. And when I looked at them closely, I would sometimes see smudges that resembled faces pressed against the glass from the inside. Eyes wide open, mouth screaming. I stopped inviting people over. Not because I feared what might happen to them, but because they simply didn't stay. A friend who visited for coffee stayed less than 10 minutes before making an awkward excuse to leave. Another who planned to spend the night changed his mind after walking through the hallway, claiming he suddenly felt like he had walked into a place meant for the dead, not the living. I didn't argue. I felt it too. One evening, the rain returned, heavier than before, hammering the roof like fists beating against a casket lid. I was sitting in the den when I heard footsteps above me. Steady, deliberate steps. But I live alone. I went upstairs with a kitchen knife in one hand and a flashlight in the other. Every room was empty. But in the guest bedroom, the one I hadn't touched since moving in, I found something impossible: the mirror. The same antique mirror that had vanished from the living room. It stood perfectly upright against the far wall, reflecting not my image, but the room as it was 30 years ago: dated furniture, yellowing wallpaper, and a small child sitting on the bed with his back to me. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The boy's reflection slowly turned to look at me in the mirror, but there was no one on the bed in the actual room. His face was pale, skin damp and bloated, his eyes solid black. His mouth opened, but instead of speaking, he cried, a slow, mournful sobbing that didn't come from the mirror, but from directly behind me. I turned, knife raised, but nothing was there. The sobbing ceased instantly. I wrapped the mirror in a blanket and locked it in the attic. I thought that would help. I thought if I put it away, the strange events would stop. But the next night, the mirror returned to my bedroom. This time, I didn't even approach it. I just left the house and walked until morning, drenched in rain, soaked to the bone, trying to shake the feeling that something had followed me from the attic. That same week, I called a local historian who had written a book about strange architecture and hauntings in the region. She agreed to meet with me after I emailed her some of the photos and described what I was experiencing. When we met, she looked pale, thinner than her online photos, as if something had been eating at her for a long time. She brought with her an old journal, handwritten, with pages that looked brittle and darkened from moisture. "This house you're living in," she said, "was built over the ruins of something older. A farmhouse that burned down in 1911 under mysterious circumstances. But even that wasn't the beginning. That land, it's marked. People use to talk about a window that should never be looked through during rainstorms. It was a story passed down for generations until it was mostly forgotten, except by those who had seen what's on the other side." "What's on the other side?" I asked. She didn't answer immediately. She turned a page in the journal and showed me a drawing, a crude, childlike sketch of a wide-eyed figure pressing its face against glass, tears of ink spilling from its eyes. "Something that used to be human," she whispered. "Something that remembers being shut out." She told me to get out of the house. Sell it. Burn it. Do whatever I had to do to break the connection. But I was already too deep. Every time I tried to leave, something pulled me back. If I stayed at a hotel, I'd see fogged windows in my room, even on the highest floors. If I stayed with a friend, they'd wake in the middle of the night with bruises around their eyes. Always the same phrase whispered in sleep. "Why did you look?" Eventually, I stopped trying. I returned home and accepted that the house wasn't just haunted. It was waiting. It wanted something, or someone. And in the rain, the windows began to cry again. The rain had become a constant companion. Its relentless patter against the windows a grim reminder of the house's ever-watchful presence. Each droplet seemed to carry whispers, unintelligible yet profoundly unsettling, as if the house itself was murmuring secrets too dreadful to comprehend. The once comforting creaks of the old wooden floors now echoed like ominous footsteps, and the shadows cast by the flickering lights danced with a life of their own. Sleep became elusive. When I did manage to drift off, my dreams were plagued by visions of distorted faces pressed against the glass, their hollow eyes pleading, mouths agape in silent screams. I would awaken drenched in sweat, the echoes of their voiceless cries lingering in my ears. The mirror, which had reappeared inexplicably in the guest bedroom, became a focal point of my dread. Its surface no longer reflected reality, but a twisted version of the room, where shadows moved independently and figures lurked just beyond the periphery. Desperate for answers, I delved into the house's history, uncovering tales of previous occupants who had vanished without a trace, their disappearances shrouded in mystery and fear. Local legends spoke of a curse, a malevolent entity bound to the house, feeding off the despair of those within. The more I learned, the more the pieces began to fit together, painting a picture of a dwelling that was less a home and more a trap, ensnaring souls to satiate its insatiable hunger. One stormy night, the whispers grew louder, coalescing into discernible words. "Join us." The mirror's surface rippled like disturbed water, and from its depths, a hand emerged, pale and dripping, followed by a face identical to mine, but twisted with anguish. Paralyzed with terror, I watched as my doppelganger reached out, its eyes locking onto mine with a sorrowful intensity. Suddenly, the mirror shattered, shards flying outward, and the apparition vanished, leaving only the sound of the rain and my ragged breathing. In the aftermath, I found myself questioning my sanity. Was the house truly haunted, or was I succumbing to madness? The line between reality and illusion blurred, and I realized that the house thrived on this uncertainty, manipulating perceptions to isolate and consume. Determined to break free, I decided to confront the entity, to face the darkness head-on. Armed with knowledge and a flickering hope, I prepared for the final confrontation, knowing that the outcome would determine not just my fate, but the fate of all who had fallen victim to the house's malevolence. I kept the lights on every night after the mirror shattered, but the darkness had already found its way in. It wasn't about light anymore, it was about presence. There is something here with me now, something that didn't need shadows to hide. I could feel it in the way the house breathed in rhythm with mine. I could hear it in the faint rasp of a voice just behind the thunder when the rain hit hardest. And I could see it in the windows. It was always in the windows, not behind them, not in the reflection, in the glass itself. Every pane held an impression, a dim silhouette of something pressed into the inside of the glass. Not visible straight on, only from an angle, only when the rain traced the outlines. At first, I thought it was condensation or residue. I tried to wipe one clean, but the image didn't smear. It shifted. It pulled away from the rag like skin flinching from heat. That's when I stopped touching the glass. The kitchen window was the worst. It had the clearest view of the backyard, which had turned into a sodden marsh of rotting leaves and standing water. One night, just before dusk, I noticed something in the water, a pale shape. I stood at the window for minutes trying to decide if it was a reflection or something floating, and then it moved. It didn't ripple the water. It just slid beneath the surface, away from the window's view. And that's when the house whispered again. Do you remember the first one? The voice wasn't mine, and it wasn't anyone I'd ever known. It came from every direction. I ran from room to room, trying to find a source, but the voice always stayed just behind me. In the guest bedroom, the whisper was clearest. She looked through the window too long. I stopped. The voice changed. It wasn't angry. It sounded sad. It sounded lonely. I knew then that I wasn't just dealing with some haunting or residual energy. This thing, it was alive. Not in the way people are. It was intelligent in the way cancer spreads. It grew where it could. It fed where it was allowed. And it had been here long before I ever showed up. I started researching disappearances in the area again. There were more than I thought. Most of them involved people who had recently moved into homes near the lake or into old houses like mine. The strange part was how none of them were classified as crimes. They were just missing. No signs of struggle. No break-ins. Just vanished. In more than one report, the last known sighting of the person was standing at the window, watching the rain. And then just 2 nights ago, something new happened. I woke up to a noise, not thunder, not whispers. A knocking, but it wasn't at the front door. It was from inside the living room window. I stared from the hallway. The window was covered in condensation again, but behind the fog was a single imprint, a human hand. It was pressed against the inside of the glass, fingers splayed wide. It didn't move when I turned on the light. It didn't vanish. It just stayed there. I walked closer, cautiously, heart pounding, and then I saw something I can't explain. There was a face in the window, but not mine. A woman's. Her mouth was moving, her eyes glassy and weeping. From the eyes themselves, water seemed to drip down, not tears, but something thicker. And then I realized the sound in the room wasn't rain. It was breathing. Shallow, ragged, coming from the wall itself. When I blinked, the figure was gone. But the window stayed wet long after the rain stopped. I've tried recording the events, but cameras don't work. The files either erase themselves or the images distort into static. One time I left the phone recording while I slept. The next morning, the audio was just my name being said over and over again. 43 times. Quietly, slowly, and always from just a few feet from the microphone. I haven't played it again. I think I know what the entity wants now. I think it feeds on grief, on attention. The windows, the crying, the whispers. It's all a way of pulling you in, making you watch, making you listen. And once you do for long enough, once you engage, it begins to grow in you. It's growing in me. I see movement in my peripheral vision, even when I'm outside. The windows of other homes shimmer when I pass them. I'm not sure it's bound to this house anymore. I've been thinking about leaving, but something tells me it's too late. I used to think silence was a comfort, something you retreat to when the world becomes too loud. But that was before the silence started pressing in like breath against the back of my neck. Since that last knock on the window, the rain hasn't stopped. It's a permanent fixture now, like gravity or hunger. At first it seemed like a storm system had settled over the town, but I checked every forecast, every satellite feed I could find. It doesn't exist beyond the perimeter of this street. Only here, only above my house. I tried to leave. I packed a bag, turned off the breakers, even taped up the windows. I drove for nearly 2 hours without turning back. But every road I took, every exit I merged onto, looped. Somehow, impossibly, the highway began repeating itself. I passed the same billboard 3 times. Same bit mile marker. And then, sometime after the 4th pass, I was pulling back into my driveway, engine stuttering like it had been running on empty for days. The rain was still falling, harder now. And in every window of the house, something was waiting. Not watching, waiting. The windows aren't just glass anymore. They're mouths. And something behind them has been speaking in a language made of sobs and glass creaks, calling to me by name. That night, I saw her again. The woman in the window. But she wasn't in the house anymore. She was in me. I woke up to find her reflection in the mirror instead of mine. Not a trick of the light. Her eyes met mine in the glass and followed me as I stepped away. I smashed the mirror, thinking I'd rid myself of it, but every shard still held a piece of her, twitching with silent breath. And from somewhere deep in the house, I heard the crying begin again, low, childlike, and utterly hopeless. I know now that the crying in the windows is people. I tore into the living room wall 2 nights ago. I don't know what drove me to do it. Maybe desperation, maybe instinct, but something under the wallpaper had been pulsing. Behind the floral pattern was a layer of plaster, so damp it peeled off with my bare hands. Beneath that wood slats slick with something warmer than rainwater. And behind those, flesh, not a body, just flesh. It moved, reacted to my touch, pulsed like it was breathing. Its surface rippled in perfect rhythm with the rainfall, as though the house had become a living part of the storm. When I touched it, the crying grew louder in my head, not in my ears. Inside my thoughts, like dozens of people whispering all at once. Names, apologies, screams choked by water. I think the windows are membranes, not barriers, portals. Every person who vanished was absorbed, drawn in through their own reflection. Every time they stared too long at the rain, listened too closely to the weeping, it pulled them in. Not just spiritually, physically. I found evidence. Beneath the floorboards near the guest bedroom, I uncovered what looked like bone. Too smooth to be old wood, too rounded to be animal. Fingers, tiny ones, like a child had reached up from underneath and tried to claw their way out. But they were fused into the wood itself, like the house had eaten them. I haven't slept in days. The crying never stops now, not even when the rain does. And sometimes, for minutes at a time, the rain does stop, only to be replaced by a silence so total it feels like I've gone deaf. In those moments, I hear something else, something beyond crying, breathing, but not mine. From behind every window, even the ones I've boarded up, I hear that breath now, slow, wet, deliberate, as if the house itself is preparing for something. And last night, I understood what. The windows are full. Whatever was behind them, it's inside now. I woke up standing in front of the hallway window with no memory of walking there. The pain was fog from my breath. My hand was already pressed against the glass. And from the other side, another hand met mine. But it wasn't mine. It was withered, cold, twitching, and it pushed through. Just for a second, the surface of the window bent like a soap bubble, and the hand passed through it, followed by the star of a face. That's when I blacked out. When I came to, the floor was wet, the lights were off, and every single window in the house was gone. Not broken, missing, frame and all. In their place, holes. Open, gaping holes in a blackness. No rain, no sky. Just a kind of void that seemed to whisper in slow, yawning syllables. The rain was inside now, dripping from the ceiling, pooling beneath the bed, running down the walls like the house was crying from every surface. And in that rain I saw faces. Her face, his face, my face, each one mouthing the same word. Stay. This is the last thing I'll write. I try to call for help, but phones don't work anymore. Not just mine, none of them. Every call I make loops back to me. When I speak, I hear my voice repeated seconds later, begging, screaming, sometimes laughing. The house has claimed me, and I think, in the end, that's what it wants, to be known, to be felt. It feeds on grief, memory, reflection, anything that lingers. And once you've spent enough time looking into the windows, crying with them, they start looking into you. There's no exorcism for this, no cleansing ritual, because the entity isn't a ghost, it's a pattern, a resonance that found form, like mold given shape, like sadness given a mouth. I'm not leaving because there's nowhere else to go. I think I'm becoming one of the windows. So if you ever find this place, and the rain begins to fall without clouds, and the windows look a little too human, don't watch them. Don't listen. And whatever you do, never answer when they cry.